Hello everyone and welcome to the third leg of the Fide Grand Prix 2019. This one is played in Hamburg in Germany. It's Hikaru Nakamura versus Veselin Topalov. I thought it was an interesting game to show. Sorry about the e4 already being on the board, and sorry about that. As usual in the Fide Grand Prix, players are fighting for one of the two spots in the candidates tournament that will be held in 2020, so a lot is on the line here. And in the previous leg of the Fide Grand Prix that was held in Riga, Veselin Topalov eliminated Hikaru Nakamura from the Grand Prix. Two of their classical games were drawn, then Topalov won their rapid game, and then the second rapid game was drawn, so he was able to eliminate him, and definitely Nakamura would enjoy getting back to Topalov here. So without further ado, let's check it out. And just a fun fact for those of you who may be interested, there are two bids now for the 2020 World Chess Championship match that was placed by the United Arab Emirates and also by Argentina. So the World Chess Championship match will be held in one of those two places. I don't know if it automatically goes to the highest bidder. I remember in the well, I don't remember, but I know that, for example, during the negotiations when Fischer was about to play the World Chess Championship match, first they asked him and Spassky, do they agree on the venue, and only if they didn't agree, then, for example, Fide would decide instead of them. But I don't know if it goes automatically to the highest bidder. So I only know that for now it's the United Arab Emirates and Argentina. If I know more, I will tell you. And if some of you know more, also do share in the comments. So that being said, let's check out the game. Nakamura with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. We have the Ruy Lopez is on the board. We have knight to f6, the Berlin defense, d3, and bishop to c5, the alpha 0 variation of the Berlin, as a lot of nice games were played in this variation. Bishop captures on c6, we have d captures on c6, and now h3. We have knight back to d7, and here a lot of moves have been played here. Castle has been played here, knight to c3 has been played here, knight bd2 has been played here, queen to e2 was played here, bishop to e3 was played here, but bishop to g5, the move Nakamura plays, is a new move in the position, and it is already as of move 7 that we have a completely new game. So if it's a new move, if it's a good move, why wasn't it played before? Well, Topalov pushes the bishop back with f6. We have bishop back to e3, and now bishop captures on e3. We have f captures on e3, and now queen to e7. So basically, it's the same as if, for example, white went bishop to e3 first, black just captured, and then after the trade, black decided to play f6 for some reason. So by that logic, it should be good for white, unless f6 is actually a useful move in this position. And it would seem that yes, in this position, f6 is a useful move. So knight to c3 by Nakamura, continuing development with b6. Topalov wants to develop the light square bishop by fianchettoing him. We have castles by Nakamura and bishop to b7. At some point, Topalov will push c5 and unleash the bishop. We have knight to h4 by Nakamura, kind of trying to bait g5, although very unlikely, as this would give a permanent f5 outpost to Nakamura's knight. So Topalov just plays g6, takes away the f5 square from the knight, and prepares f5 at some point. We have queen to e1 by Nakamura, and now a queenside castle by Topalov. We have a3, now preparing to expand on the queenside, as Topalov now castled queenside, and king to b8, just a nice prophylactic move. We have b4 by Nakamura, and now c5, finally. Opening up the light square bishop, we have knight to a4, putting more pressure here on the c5 pawn, also preparing to expand with c4, and bishop to c6. Topalov says go back with the knight, and here Nakamura plays knight back to b2. And here it's, well, the knight was of course more useful on c3 as it controlled the d5 square, and it might be hard to develop your game with one knight being on b2 and one knight being on the rim. Or maybe it won't, we'll see what happens. Rook h to g8, Topalov now places this rook on g8, the other rook is coming to f8, so from there the two rooks will be very strong when you start pushing the g and the f pawn. Rook to d1 by Nakamura, and now rook d to f8 as planned, and here c4. And now you can see that White's position is in fact okay, but it would be Or rather, it would be okay if this knight was on c3, for example, and if the other knight maybe was on f3. Okay, here it kind of controls the f5 square, but not really. There's not all that much you can do to prevent it. But if the knight was on c3, you control the d5 square. That's a good square for the knight. On b2, you're gonna have to waste a move. For example, bring this rook over here, bring the knight here, bring the knight to c3 to introduce the knight back into the game. But okay, Topalov realizes that and he says f5. Let's start our attack on the king's side. We have b5 by Nakamura first, bishop to b7, and now e captures on f5. There is a double attack on the e4 pawn, so you kind of have to react to this f5 move. So e captures on f5, we have g captures on f5, now opening up the g file for this rook, and the knight is now also useful there as it guards the g2 pawn. So we have rook to d2, now not only adding another defender to the g2 pawn, but also freeing the d1 square for this knight to get back into the game. We have queen to g5 by Topalov, now with a triple attack on the g2 pawn, and now e4. Nakamura decides it's time to close this beautiful diagonal from this bishop. F captures on e4. Now Nakamura trades a pair of rooks. Rook captures. Now not rook captures. You want your well, pressure on the g file to remain. So knight captures, and also you want this knight to come to e6 from there. Both of these very nice outposts, d4 and f4, will be available to you. So d captures on e4. Now this diagonal is closed, and now knight to e6, and now probably going to d4 or f4 depending on what white plays. So knight back to f3, kicking the queen back, also keeping an eye on the e5 pawn, and now queen to h5. Already with a threat of just queen captures knight, as you will not be able to capture back due to the pin along the g file. King to h2, Nakamura now gets this threat out of the way, and now knight to d4, just adding another attacker here. So already there are some dangers here. If, for example, Nakamura made a silly move, just rook captures on g2 wins the game. You will not be able to capture if king g2. Well, even if rook g2, then just knight captures here. It forks the king and the queen, so you lose the game like that. And if you capture with the king, it's just queen captures. You move the king, and then just bishop captures on e4. That's pretty much it. You're gonna come to h1. And if you block this with rook h2, just queen f4, and now there is no defense against knight to f3 with a monster fork. So after this knight to d4 move, we have queen to e3. And here we have a very exciting moment. It's not an easy position, of course. It's a very tricky position where Topalov played a certain move. I will not say which move this is, but feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for black here. And when you're thinking of the move, think of Capablanca. It will help you. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding such a beautiful move. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, Topalov played bishop to c8. It introduces another attacker into the game, but there was an even stronger, a quieter move. Well, it's a pretty loud, quiet move. It's rook to g4. This is just insane, as you cannot capture, of course. But the point is, rook captures on e4 is a huge threat, and there is no way for white to defend this. That's white is helpless here. Just rook captures on e4 on the next move. Then you eliminate this pawn, which creates a pass pawn for yourself. This becomes a pass pawn. You capture it, you move the rook to f4, and you start pushing the passed e pawn. So that's the way to go. And you don't get to trade knight for rook because, for example, queen captures. This comes with check, so you don't have time to pick up the rook. So really, rook to g4, just a beautiful move. Topalov misses it probably because he's not the kind of guy that goes after pawns, but rather he introduces another attacker into the game. Already with a pretty big threat, bishop captures on h3 could already create a lot of problems for Nakamura. So Nakamura gets the knight out of the way, knight to e1, not allowing any sacrifices, and also adds another defender to the g2 pawn. We have queen to g6, now shifting attention to the e4 pawn, and also at some point Topalov wants to push h5, h4 to really grab hold of the g3 square. So knight e to d3, trying to get the knights back into the game. Sorry, knight e to d3, this knight comes to e3, now preparing to bring the knights into the game, also attacking the e5 pawn. and now rook to e8. For the moment, Topalov defends the pawn with knight to d1, now remaneuvering with the knights, and now queen back to g8. Now attacking the c4 pawn. So here, just knight 3 to b2, defending the c4 pawn, and now bishop to e6, adding yet another attacker to the pawn. So here, Topalov didn't really find a way to break through the defenses on the king side, and now he has to go for the pawn. With queen to d3, adding another defender to the pawn, and now rook to d8, aligning the rook with the queen here. So queen to c3, of course Nakamura doesn't like that, and now h5. The idea is h4. At some point you want to bring your rook over here and then place your rook on g3. So rook to f2 by Nakamura, hoping that if the rook ever and the queen leave the final rank, you might have some ideas with maybe rook to f8, and if you can get this pawn all the way to a6, could be one of the ideas you have for a counterattack. So h4 by Topalov, and now a4. We have queen to g6, now again going after the pawn on e4, and again Nakamura defends it, queen to e3. Rook to g8, and now comes king to h1, not allowing queen to g3 check. You will be unable to trade because this captures with check, then you lose the rook. So king to h1, just not allowing any checks, and now queen to h5. Preparing to bring the rook over to g3. And here a5, and here Topalov should go for rook to g3, even allow rook to f8 check, but after bishop to c8 you kind of have to see that after queen to f2, which threatens bishop captures, to just bring the queen all the way up there. You can just capture here, and white is not in time to push a6. But Topalov decides that he's just gonna get the king over to a much safer square, as he doesn't want to deal with this on the queen side. So queen back to e1, now preparing queen to f1 to double rooks on the f file. Not rooks, but to create a queen-rook battery on the f-file, and only now rook to g3 by Topalov. We have queen to f1, now preparing to bring the rook over to f8 with check, so king to d7, just getting to a nice safer square, and now knight to d3. Which seems odd as it gives up the c4 pawn, but even if you try something like knight to a4, you still lose the c4 pawn, because if queen captures, then queen captures the knight on d1 with check. The queen is guarding the knight here. So we have knight to d3, with the idea that if bishop captures, then knight captures with check might pick up the bishop. So Topalov doesn't want to go into this. It's a very tricky line. Bishop captures, knight captures with check, queen captures, and queen captures on c4. Queen captures on e4, and now queen to f7 check. And now you have to calculate that after king d6, rook f6 check, knight blocks, and that you are actually fine. After queen f8, okay, the knight is pinned, so you cannot move, just king to, not to d5, but to e5, and now you escape everything, and you are better, of course. But it's a lot of calculation, and if it's not necessary, just play king to e7, and now you don't have to calculate all that much. So knight 1 back to b2, keeping an eye on the c4 pawn, and here rook back to g8. We have a6 now, and now comes queen to g5, again doubling up on the g file, and queen to g1 by Nakamura. So here it, it's when I saw this position, I thought, well, okay, bishop captures on h3 is obvious, but obviously there's something wrong with it, as Topalov didn't play it. And indeed, if bishop captures on h3, you can go queen here, now just attack the bishop, and also the e5 pawn is attacked twice. So here you would just have to go back and allow queen captures on e5. So that's what's wrong with bishop captures on h3. So here Topalov went c6. He wants to break this pawn chain here. The idea is just to capture and then capture back with the knight. So Nakamura trades on c6 with knight captures, and now rook back to f1. And here queen to g3, again with the idea of now just capturing here, and after pawn captures you capture with the queen, you deliver check, and after the white queen blocks you're just going to pick up the rook on f1. So a pretty straightforward plan, and Nakamura prevents it with queen to f2. And now again, feel free to pause the video. What do you play here? Well, I give you a couple of seconds, of course. For those of you who were able to find it, congratulations on finding such a, elusive tactic. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop captures on h3 again. Point is, after the queen is captured and the pawn is captured, the bishop cannot be taken. So you just grabbed a clean pawn, and now you just have a winning advantage. I mean, a much better position, which you should convert with proper play, because if you capture, then just check and you lose the rook. However, Topalov did not play bishop captures on h3. Topalov saw that there are weak pawns on the queen side, that knight a5 will just pick up the c4 pawn, so he just traded queens. We have knight captures queen, and now just rook to d8, preparing to bring the rook to d2, which will be a super active rook. So Nakamura already prepares how he's going to exchange it with knight f to d1. Okay, Topalov brings the rook into the game, and now rook to f2. You have to prevent it, otherwise it's too active a rook. So rook captures, knight captures, and now probably the idea why Topalov did not search so far to find the other idea, as he saw knight a5 just picks up the c4 pawn, and that will be enough. So king h2 by Nakamura, and now knight captures on c4. We have knight to a4, of course, avoiding further trades. Now, there are some plans, for example, that this knight can capture on b6, and after pawn recaptures, you can, after this knight moves, of course, at the moment you're guarding the b6 pawn, but you should bring your king closer, just, take care of all of white's ideas. So, knight back to c3, king to c6, and now g3. We have h captures on g3, king captures. Now Nakamura also created a passed pawn, and now b5. Topalov now starts pushing his passed pawn. So here, Topalov is up a pawn, but also his position is just better. So knight to d3, going after a d5 pawn, if the knight moves, that is, and now just b4, pushing the knight back. We have knight to a4 with a double attack here, but Topalov doesn't care. He says, if you capture that, I'm just going to push the pawn, and that's it. So h4, and Nakamura starts pushing his own passed pawn, but bishop to f7, not allowing it. King g4, preparing to push further. Now bishop g6, going after the e4 pawn now. We have knight back to c3, and here just b2. The b2 pawn is protected, so it's not a problem. And here Nakamura is out of any good ideas. He goes back with the king. King d6. Now, again, adding another defender to the pawn here. Now the knight can move. So knight to b5 check. Here Nakamura tries to take care of the a7 pawn and maybe create some chances here, but Topalov calculates precisely. King d7. We have knight captures on b2 now, as Topalov is threatening to promote it. Knight captures, and now knight captures on a7. And here Topalov just played bishop to h5 check, and it was in this position on move 66 that Hikaru Nakamura resigned the game. So it seems that he really doesn't do well against Topalov, but you always have someone who you want to play against, who you don't want to play against, or maybe it's just chance that he lost twice to him in the FIDE Grand Prix, even though, like I said, previous two classical games were drawn in the Riga FIDE Grand Prix. Here in Hamburg, now Topalov takes a win in the classical time section. So tomorrow Nakamura has to win back if he wants to go into the Rapids, otherwise he is again eliminated by Topalov from the FIDE Grand Prix. Here you just don't have any chances. It's just too easy for the king to control the passed pawn. Whatever you do, king g3, just bishop here. You could pick up the pawn here. It's really, if you guard the pawn, then just you can deliver check. Whatever whatever white plays, you can just go after this pawn, and the king will, like I said, very easily control this pawn. So yeah, Nakamura of course resigned, and an excellent win for Veselin Topalov in round 1 of the FIDE Grand Prix in Hamburg. So he's I don't know how he is in total points, but I don't think he's at the top for the candidate spot. But if he does extremely well, it of course is possible. He is one step closer to that candidates tournament, and a candidates tournament with Topalov in it is always a cheerful event. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Pablo Mohan, Martin Walters, and Krishna Srini for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE Grand Prix, as I will be covering it up until Friday. On Friday, I will be going to Germany for a few days. Not in Hamburg. I'm going to Bad Pyrmont, but maybe, just maybe, I will visit the FIDE Grand Prix in Hamburg if I manage the time. So we'll see how it goes. And if any of you are maybe from there, maybe we can grab a beer or, you know, just chill or something like that. But I will keep you informed. But yeah, that's, like I said, the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I will see you soon. Thank you all.